Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have back with me Abby Filyaw and Lamar Davis. Lamar, we have not had the chance to introduce you to our audience, so I wondered if we might start with you telling us your professional background, what you're doing now, and your story.
Okay. Don't hold it against me. I'm a lawyer and I have come with some baggage. But most of my career has been spent in government service back in Arkansas, where I'm from. And I did some emergency management stuff, working for the governor's office and attorney general's office and some other agencies. And emergency management, disaster recovery is near and dear to me. And so is helping people. And I'm also going into the ministry. I'm drawn to suffering people. And the current role I have is a disaster recovery coordinator with the Rio, Texas conference. That's the conference in this area for the United Methodist Church. And so my role is to develop a comprehensive plan to do long-term recovery. So when folks come through and then we do the case, people do the case work, the case management. We help with funding and setting up apparatuses so they can continue to have long-term recovery from disasters.
I'm glad you said the word disasters because I was about to ask you about the word recovery.
Yes.
We just had another recovery podcast earlier, and that was recovery in the substance abuse arena.
Yeah.
But now we're talking about a different type of recovery. Can you tell us the type of recovery you and your group are specializing in?
We are specializing in disaster long-term recovery. And the distinction is, so think about the disaster in a couple of ways, right? So the event happens and there's a emergency response and then relief comes, which is like tarping houses. So emergency response teams come in, stop the bleeding, mitigate the damage. And then in Kerrville, we had a long recovery period of recovering people who have passed away. So between that, you move from the recovery phase to the case management phase, where we're sorting out who's eligible for what benefits. And then that casework is done through a long-term recovery group, and we help support those group efforts. And that is connecting people with finding a new normal. That's our job, right? So from the Rio, Texas conference perspective, we will support all the churches in this area, and they're going to participate with long-term recovery groups. So for us, that's Concho Valley, that's the Rio Grande Valley, and Kerrville, and Kerr-Kind and Kerr together. So we'll be there helping the churches do the case management, do the construction management, and helping people find their new normal.
Even within the word recovery and the definition you gave us, there's still lots of different types of recovery.
Yes.
And I'd like to ask you about mental health recovery, grief recovery, emotional recovery, all of the things that many of us are feeling that we may not have expected to feel. How is your group really helping or working to help people in the mental health area?
I'm glad you asked that question. This is going to be a long process. So the first thing we're doing is making sure we level set with folks, telling them that we've just scratched the surface. We really don't know who needs long-term care yet, but what other events can tell us, for example, Katrina, they're still feeling the examples 25 years after. They're having mental health issues, substance abuse issues have increased. Violent activities linked to mental illness has increased since then. So we're in for a long ride. And so what we would be doing is having case managers support mental health needs. We would be having people involved in supporting mental health issues that come up for the foreseeable future.
Abby, can I ask you a few words about what you see the role of recovery in substance abuse and the type of work you do in the types of recoveries that the citizens in I was going to say Kerrville and Kerr County, but really the state of Texas need at this point?
Thank you. I have noticed just driving back and forth to and from work, mostly when I drive home, I noticed that the parking lots for the different bars are pretty full, more full than usual. And we've had a lot of disaster relief volunteers from all over the country. And obviously, we're so grateful for their support. I see a lot of those types of vehicles at these establishments at 7, 8 o'clock at night. And I definitely know that after a disaster, it is completely natural to want to self-medicate. It is normal. Most people use substances not problematically. But when something like this happens and there's trauma and there's collective trauma, I think that we're probably at risk for more people developing a substance use disorder and potentially not having all of the skills that they need to recover in a healthy way. And that's why My agency steps in with the nonprofit, the free outpatient recovery support, outpatient treatment, any kind of service, referral to inpatient. Anyone can walk into our office, be seen that day, and get a list of resources or sit with a recovery coach to get the support they need that day. So I'm so grateful that my agency sees the value in low barrier entry to any kind of conversation about substance use. Hill Country MHDD has their emotional support centers open 7 days a week at their Water Street location. So the resources are there. Kerr County really has the resources, and so many people have been stepping up to volunteer their time to at least talk about it and say it's okay, it's totally fine, it's actually really normal what you're going through. If your substance use has escalated, that makes sense. Let's talk about it. Let's find out what your recovery goals are, and we can all just support each other going through this collective grief.
There are many types of recovery from this flood, and we've touched on a few of those, obviously clothing, housing, financials. But what about the long-term mental health? And let me just use myself as an example. This event bothered me more than any other event, including 9/11. And I didn't think anything could bother me more than 9/11. And I was very depressed. I can't even begin to guess why. I can give some reasons, but maybe they mean something or maybe not. But how do you really help someone who may be in that situation where they just feel bad and they don't know why? And I live 15 miles from the river, so it wasn't that. So how do you reach out to that person?
We reach out and dialogue and conversation and keeping the doors open. I think what we have to tell ourselves is we are in this for the long haul. One conversation is not going to do it. We need to do it in our churches. We need to do it in synagogues. We need to do it everywhere we possibly can, because mental health they're lagging indicators. But by the time we report or it gets to substance use disorder, the mental health has already exploded. So we've got to be proactive, right? And look for people who have obvious symptoms, anger, depression, anxiety, rage. Those are things that kind of tip us off that there may be a long-term issue there. And you're right. The places are overrun with help. And so we're going to be funding these places. We're going to be offering caseworkers, and we're going to be trying to find different ways to get into areas that are unreached. And I have to say that there are communities where stigma still exists and people don't want to talk about mental health, right? In Black and brown communities, people don't talk about mental health. When I was growing up, we didn't talk about it, right? And so it was a stigma. You were supposed to just pray it away, honestly, and not seek help. I'm of the opinion you can do both, and both matter. David has been at the tip of the spear for organizing ministers. We have a faith fellowship meeting on a weekly basis. And we recently had a guest come in talking about Lamentations, and the whole focus was that it's okay to be sorrowful and to grieve. And that's a part of the process. Not only did Jesus do it, but in the Old Testament, David grieved, right? And so these things are biblical, they're natural, they're normal. So part of the answer to the first question is normalizing grief, normalizing sorrow. It's okay to go through these things, and we're here to help each other. So I look forward to seeing that series in October. I'm sure it's going to be a good one.
The city manager of Kerrville has said that he anticipates a 5 to 10 year economic recovery for the community. Is the mental health recovery going to be that length as well, in your experience?
I think at least that, if not more. I think so. You can look at Katrina, right? 25 years later, they're still doing it. And I'll say here, going back to when you were saying you just feel bad, anytime you have that many children die, we're going to feel bad for a while. That's horrific. And I remember when the flood hit, I was working in the shelter and parents were coming in waiting for news of their children. I can't make that go away, right? I can't not remember a parent waiting for news of their child. And so frontline workers, people who are responding, they're going to be living with that for quite some time. And usually they're the last ones to report it because they're still in the field. They're still making those operations happen. And so there's a culture in first responders not to report. They're supposed to be tough. They're supposed to be frontline workers. How dare I go get help? They have some of the most acute illnesses when you think about it.
What about the people who may not have been frontline emergency services responders, but were exposed to just horrific events like having to go to the funeral home, having to see children laid out to help try to identify them. And they were not trained professionally for that. How can we help them?
I'm a big proponent of prayer. And I think prayer, spiritual intervention, I think having an open dialogue. And I think first treating the people who are doing the treatment. Our bishop is really keen on making sure that our ministers are taken care of, because honestly, they're not equipped to have multiple funerals with a whole family laid out to be put to rest. That's not something that they learn in divinity school. And so they're people too. They're fathers and mothers too, and they have their own children, and they can see another parent's grief. So caring for the people who are doing the caring, keeping the lines of communication open, and again, destigmatizing the need for help. Asking for help is what healthy people do. So let's talk about it.
I tell people it's a big county, but a small town.
Yeah.
And everybody knows either someone who died or someone who lost someone. So you guys wouldn't know it, but there were people who sat in those chairs that died.
Wow.
And and Andrew knows people that died. I know people that died. And the scope of the disaster is literally unlimited within our town. But there's an overlay on this that I hadn't fully appreciated until a couple of weeks ago, and it's the following. These summer camps have been here for 100 years. There are 6 generations of families that have gone to these camps. Mystic, Stewart, Waldemar, you name the camp. And it has driven the grief throughout the state of Texas and across this country.
Absolutely.
I have fraternity brothers that lost granddaughters. I have one friend in Austin. They lost 2 on his street. And it's just made the grief so much more. How would you encourage someone who is not here and not directly seeing and doing all the things that we're talking about, but maybe feeling that grief? How would you encourage them to try and get some help?
Reach out to your clergy, reach out to your primary care physician. If you are in treatment or if you're connected to a treatment organization, go in there and talk about it. Don't wait until you find yourself at a bar, right? Because for people in recovery, it's far too late at that point. And for people who will cope habitually, they're headed on the slippery slope. And that's what the studies tell us, right? And I would encourage people to talk about it now rather than later, and continue to talk about it, because one of the practices that I do through meditation is whenever the amends needs to be made, you continue to do it. You go through the same process. It's not a one-time thing. Sorrow's not a one-time thing. Grief's not a one-time thing. And so you practice at resolving those things. And the way to do that is to be in community and to continue to work at it.
You've mentioned Katrina a couple of times, or 2 or 3 times in this podcast. This week was the 25th anniversary of Katrina. So there've been a lot of stories about Katrina. Are there any lessons that the mental health community learned from Katrina that we have brought forward these 25 years later that we can apply to our community today?
Access to public health and access to health in general are important. Pre-planning is important. Mitigation strategies, important, right? And looking for underserved communities, because when one facet of the community is underserved, it affects the rest of us, right? We don't get to say the folks over on this side of the track, they're going to be okay if they're not ministered to. It affects everyone as a whole community. Katrina bears that out. 25 years later, things haven't come back. You mentioned the economic impact. They're still struggling. Businesses left. Kerrville is doing great. This town is unified. They're pulling for people to come back. They're talking about getting economic development out there in the camps to make sure the camps come back. These are the kind of things that provide a good model for other places where they have natural disasters.
You mentioned the role of the clergy, and my perception is that men and women trained in divinity school will be trained to help a person or a couple get through grief, and they'll be trained to counsel, and they'll be trained to give comfort, but they're not trained to give an entire community comfort or 30 people comfort. And so how is the church working to help the ministers who are literally on the front lines as much as any first responder deliver that service, yet kind of keep them on the level?
That's a great question. David Payne is a mentor, a friend. He's my pastor. He's leading by example, right? The other week, he took 10 days off because he wanted to, one, he needed the rest. And two, he wants to set an example for other people that I need rest. Self-care is important. I'm not immune to the pressures of grief and trauma, right? And trauma is a sneaky thing, right? If it doesn't exit the body, it's going to come out in different ways. And so we have to process that. And you're right. I don't know any training that can prepare you for the level of sorrow and grief that we experienced here. It was unfathomable before it happened. So how do you prepare for it? I think that we can develop some best practices for clergy, what works and what doesn't work. And then that's part of our mitigation and resiliency strategy, right? What didn't work? What can we have done better? After action programs really helpful in disaster preparedness.
If our listeners don't know, we're not too far down the road from Uvalde. Did the conference step in Uvalde, and were you able to learn some lessons that hopefully we can apply here, although the tragedies were very different?
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to answer that question. I would just be guessing. I hope that there are best practices to learn from that. I would imagine that they are very different disasters, human-made and naturally made. I will say back on the natural disaster, the climate that we're living in, these things occur more frequently. And actually, on the man-made disasters, given the news of late, they occur more recently. So I think we have to continue to have podcasts like this and to talk about these issues and to make sure that not only on the podcast are we talking about it, but when we leave and we go back to our churches, our offices, that we say, how are you doing? How are you really doing? Because we know that this affects you. The news of that guy being killed, that's tragic, right? Let's not act like it doesn't affect us, because it does.
I want to ask you, we talked about maybe an uptick in substance abuse or self-medicating. Let me turn to the young person or person in early recovery. How do you help them get through the grief that they may be feeling in a way that's not self-medicating, using the skills you and I have used and tools you and I have used, but we've been using them a long time and we can call upon them perhaps more quickly and more easily? How do you help those people now?
I had several clients that lost everything. I lost clients. Mine and every woman in my family went to Camp Mystic, and my great uncle used to own Camp Stewart. So that part of
Bill Wilson, your uncle?
Uncle Bill. Yeah, Uncle Bill. Yeah. I never met him because it was a long time ago. But dealing with it on a personal level and how it affected me allowed me to relate to everyone that I serve. Thankfully, we got help from our San Antonio office, and we were able to call everyone that's ever called the office in the last 6 months. So we called and we said, hi, how are you doing? What can we do? We were able to give some immediate assistance financially to anyone in recovery, just because everyone's work was affected for the most part. Everyone was affected in some type of way, emotionally, physically, mentally, financially. So the state of Texas and some of our funders, Texas being one of them, they just lightened up on the restrictions and said, what can we do? So the flexibility of those funders really made a huge difference, because some people worked in construction and they couldn't get to work that day. The list of how people were affected goes on and on. But I think as a community, we can all try to be gentle with each other. Everyone is still mourning, pretending it's all fine now. I think it's tempting, for me at least, because I don't want to be sad, right? It's hard to be sad. In addiction, we use substances so we wouldn't feel sad. But I think accepting that we're all grieving, allowing ourselves to grieve, and joining things like the free Peterson grief support group, attending any kind of group, some kind of social support, AA, church, groups at our office, wherever you can gather with people and just have a good time. The Amy Grant show, the Callow, just acknowledging what happened in a public space like that with other people was really cathartic. And I think we can all help each other recover by being open to talking about feelings, accepting feelings, and just meeting somebody where they are in terms of their grief. and their recovery process. Because, yeah, absolutely. I see little kids even at church, when it starts to rain, they get scared, they get upset. I think rain is pretty triggering for a lot of us right now. Giving each other space and support around how are we going to do this together? Opening the space for safe conversations. How are you dealing with this is really, I think, what's been working. Just allowing people to talk about it and giving them a lot of grace to mourn.
Well, guys, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. But before we leave, I wanted to ask you, and I'll start with you, Abby, if anyone wanted to contact you, find out more about the services or check out the website, where would be the best way for them to do so or the best place for them to go?
hccada.org. That's the Hill Country Council on Alcohol and Drug Abuse.org. hccada.org. They can call the office. They can walk in Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. We're closed at noon on Fridays.
And Lamar, how about Rio, Texas?
RioTexas.org is the email address, and you can just email them or you can call me and I'll give you my number. It's 830-777-6130.
Guys, I can't thank you enough for coming on the pod. I hope we can continue this conversation.
Thank you for having
Thank
us.
you.
Thank you.